tell the rest of the story. Uh, RJ was hopping and holding his stomach, and we were laughing, and there came a rock that hit right in the middle of my open mouth and broke that tooth. Uh, I guess there's two lessons to be learned from that is never be stupid enough to fight with dangerous weapons. And the next is you need to know when to keep your mouth shut. I guess it was along that same road. I was picking dewberries one time, and right at my feet was a snake, and the snake was picking dewberries too. Uh, well, I got a big stick and killed him. Don't know what kind it was. Could have been a rattlesnake, you know. I would try to talk about my bravery and think it must have been a rattlesnake, but I tell you the truth, I think it was called a chicken snake. But he had big diamonds on his back, and I decided that I'd make me a snake belt. Well, I didn't know the first thing about making a snake belt. My first thought was, well, it's a wash day and the fire's around the wash pot, so I'll put him in a syrup bucket, fill him full of water, and boil him first. Maybe I was trying to boil the poison out, I don't know. But then after I boiled him, I skinned him. And then I heard about people curing skins of wild animals by tagging it to a big board and hanging it on the garage wall. So I tacked him to a board and put him out in the sun to dry. And then I noticed he dried all right. It was just so brittle you couldn't hardly do much with it. So I greased it good with some lard. And somehow I folded it over, sewed the inside, and about toward his head, I somehow fashioned me a buckle, and how proud I was to go around amongst the other boys wearing a snake belt that I'd made with my own hands. As I recall, it was along about the same stretch of road that we were throwing rocks at cars. And a big truck came by, a stake-bodied truck, meaning it had a wooden body. And there was a whole lot of children in the back of the truck. So we all threw rocks at the truck. The man slammed on the brakes, got out. We recognized who it was. It was Zell Barber. And some of the children were our age and some were older. And he let us know in no certain terms that we better not ever throw rocks that might hit one of his children. Well, I recognized it as being something he should have done and should have said, and we were doing something we shouldn't have done. And I admire a daddy that stands up for the safety of his children. On down that road one night, Ben Crosby and I went rabbit hunting. I had a flashlight that Pearson had given me. When he went off to the Navy, he gave me his flashlight. Well, I couldn't have inherited anything more precious. It was good to walk at night with a flashlight. I usually went to prayer meeting, Sunday night church, and sometime I cut through the shortcut. Always good to have a flashlight. I fashioned out of one of Daddy's old felt hats a way to fasten that flashlight in the crease of the hat, wired it so that everywhere I looked, flashlight would be shining in that direction. I had been taught that rabbit hunting at night was an interesting adventure. I don't know whether it was against the law or not. We heard it was, that you're not supposed to headlight rabbits, but it didn't seem to be much enforcement going on against rabbit hunting at night. But we were always cautious and worried about the game warden catching us hunting rabbits at night with a light. The rabbit, the way you could be sure it was a rabbit, he would show you just one eye, and the right eye would be red as a ruby. Well, we had gone down toward Mill Creek, Ben Crosby and I. He had his 20 gauge that he got from Brother Gordon, and I had the flashlight. We came up on what appeared to be a rabbit. We could see the reflection of the red eye on the beam of the flashlight. That's what we thought we saw. And Ben shot very accurately, hit what he was aiming at, and it was a gallon jug that he killed. But the shot was so loud, and we was afraid it woke up people that could hear us and know we was rabbit hunting at night. And about that time, we saw a car come down the road right before they got to Mill Creek Bridge. They stopped on the side of the road. We saw the tail lights come on, and they stopped right after being shot. And we thought, we caught. We began to think about how we could get back home, going through the woods or some way where we wouldn't have to walk on the road and get caught. We hid for a long time. And finally, we saw the lights come back on the car, and we saw them gradually go on across the bridge and on up the hill. We're glad that we were delivered from being caught headlighting at night. I've thought about that a lot, and since I got more mature, I realized that wasn't a game warden. That was a young couple that had took time out from driving to do whatever, biting each other's ear or whatever they do. It's amazing how imaginative, how big of an imagination young people have. A group of us walk home from church. If I could walk close to Mary Ella Ballard, I sure tried to get close to her. But we would look across the railroad track to what used to be at the post office, an old building that was vacant after Tom's store moved out and they built a new post office. And we could see a light in there each time we get to a certain place, and we could see a light. Well, we conjured up all kind of stories about what that was. We thought, well, it's here on the railroad, right on the railroad track, and it's probably German spies. It may be one of the German prisoners that escaped. There was a prison camp out at Hillcrest, which was the biggest dairy farm in our parts. They had turned it into a prisoner of war camp, and we thought one of them may have escaped, and he's staying there and he's getting messages to Germany. We ought to catch that spy. We finally concluded it must have been a light from somebody's house that was reflecting on the window there. Well, let me jump around and talk about Hez's mother. Hez's mother was named Clara Bell, and there was 4 Bells among those girls. One of them was Maybelle, and another one was Ora Bell, Clarabelle, and I don't know, remember what the other one was. They live right across the road from us, and I guess I spent more time growing up with Hezzy than any other person. Hezzy was very good at shooting marbles, and I wasn't too good. And he would usually win most of my marbles when I played keeps with him, so we didn't always play keeps. But I can recall Clarabelle, when she got ready for Hezzy to come in to eat, she'd come out on the porch and she'd say, Hezzy, come to dinner. Well, he didn't miss a beat. He didn't even look in that direction. He didn't pause what he was doing. He just hollered out, I'm a coming. And she'd repeat that again. She'd say, Hezzy, I said, come to dinner. And he'd repeat his again. I'm a coming. He didn't really start till about the third time, but many times he'd want me to eat with him. Hezzy was, at that time, an only child, and we had 10 in our family. And they ate pretty good, but he was not beyond stretching the truth a little bit. He said, Dale, come eat dinner with me. I said, well, what do y'all have for dinner? He said, we got steak, and we got chicken, and we got roast, and we got banana pudding. Well, he talked me into it. I went over, and invariably, we'd sit down to a plate of red beans and rice. Hezzy was not too generous. He had more stuff and got more candy, and I remember the way he would unwrap a candy bar. Take the wrapper all the way off of it to start with, and then he'd start licking around the side, rolling it in his mouth, and lick around the edges, and then reach over there and say, hey, you want a bite, Dale? He had a word that you'd have to translate. One of his favorite words was Abby Heck, which translated as I'll be heck. If I said the marble was touching the line, he would say, Abby Heck. And I knew he wasn't agreeing that the marble was touching the line. My older brother Ray was my leader, my mentor. I followed him around a lot. His cousin friend was Sonny Boy Pearson. Sonny Boy had another nickname named Dizzy. And they liked to climb up in the tree right across the road from where Hezzy and his mother Clarabelle and brother Lumpkin lived. And when she would call Hezzy, they would mimic her. She'd say, Hezzy, come to dinner. And then they'd echo, Hezzy, come to dinner. Well, all she could see was the shaking of the branches as they were laughing. And it was a wonder that she didn't shoot them out of the tree. In later years, I understand she did shoot one lady. She went back to the house after her and Brother Lumpkin got a divorce, and she was going to get some stuff out of the house. And when she went to pick up the stuff, the new wife was not very friendly and decided she wasn't going to get anything, and she raised a fuss and maybe said some bad words. And she, the new wife shot Clarabelle with some bird shot on her backside. So I got the story all mixed up. I said she did shoot someone. It was brother's new wife. Clarabelle got married and divorced 2 or 3 more times quite rapidly. One, my understanding is she married him one night, and when he woke the next morning, his billfold in his car was gone, and that was the end of that marriage after just one night. I remember an incident when Hezzy and I were coming back from school one day. Uh, we got into some kind of a ruckus, and uh, he had a knife, and he said, "I'm going to stab you with this knife, Dale. I'm going to stab you with it, S-T-O-B." And I didn't have any weapon at all except a compass. And so I said, "You cut me with that knife, and I'll punch your eyes with this compass." Well, he no doubt told his mother half the story, like people usually do. And so she came charging across the road, hit those steps, didn't knock on the door, came charging into the house. Mother was standing there ironing, and Clarabelle was demanding. She said, "You got to do something about that Dale. He has threatened my boy's life. He said he was going to punch out his eyes with a compass." Well, Mother was quite diplomatic and had a lot of qualities in peacemaking. She just kept ironing, and the only thing she had to say in answer to this tirade and this threat and so on was, "Clarabelle, do you have a big ironing?" That took all the steam out of Clarabelle. She sputtered and left. Clarabelle had a lot of good qualities. She treated me good. Uh, I went on a lot of trips with Hezzy and Brother Lumpkin and Clarabelle. And if we went to Poplarville and she bought Hezzy a toy out of the 10-cent store, she got me one too. And if she bought a hamburger and a 7-Up for Hezzy, she bought a hamburger and a 7-Up for me. If she went to the Gulf Coast to visit one of her relatives that was visiting there and staying in a tourist court, she took me with them. And I got to fish in the Gulf and got to catch some crabs and eat some of the crab salad the woman fixed. I got so sick before I got home that night I couldn't hold it. They sometimes would stop at the fork in the highway. I don't remember the name of the place, and they'd play the slot machines. Sometimes they'd drink beer. I think Hezzy was plenty smart. He just didn't care about studying much. I had to help him with his homework some, and I remember sometimes Clarabelle would give me a nickel. Right before time to go to school, Hezzy didn't have his arithmetic homework up, and I'd have to help him with it. Some of the other benefits of being Hezzy's buddy was to get to take a shower nearly every day in the summer. Brother had rigged up a 55-gallon drum and pumped the water up in it, and it was above the little shed, and it got the hot sun, and it would heat the water, and we would go take a shower almost every day. There was another place that I went to take a bath, and this was the dressing room that the boys had at school. It was just a little building that sat behind the ag building all by itself, and it had a terrible smell of body odor when you came in because the old uniforms and the old tennis shoes were stuck underneath the bench. And that place had a shower, but it didn't have any warm water. Now, my brother's good friend, Paul Monroe, and my oldest brother, Pearson, were very close, and Pearson would take a bath nearly every day, and after he got in from work, we'd load up with him and Paul Monroe and go to the school and take a cold shower. I remember G.W. Harbison was taking a shower one day there. He'd been working on the highway. I can remember when Highway 11, that went right through Carrier, right in front of our school, was a graveled highway. And I remember when they paved that road. Uh, G.W. Harbison and my brother Squeaky and some of the others was working on the road, and they took a shower after work, and I was there, and G.W. got under the cold water and got all soaked up, and he began to sing, "I feel like $1,000,000," and about the time the dollar came out, the high shower head fell and hit him right on top of the head, and I think that canceled him feeling like $1,000,000. The pavement was quite a exercise to watch, and then after it was paved, before they let the traffic on it, my older sisters, Daphne and Anna Rose, both got skates for Christmas, and they would skate all the way from where our road got to the highway all the way to Pine Hill Tourist Court, which was, I suppose, 2 miles, and that was quite a feat. They had quite a long skating rink all the way to Pine Hill. Mentioning Pine Hill also had a nice restaurant, and that was my first job, and I was so proud. I went to ask him could I work for him if school was out. So he hired me, and I was supposed to be the flunky, and I was supposed to be the bellhop. The week went along pretty good, except I remember the first car I waited on when they ordered something from the car so they wouldn't have to come in. We'd take a tray, and they rolled up the window a certain part, and we'd hang it on the window. But going through the door, I bumped the door and spilt the root beer all over the sandwich. And but they were so polite and didn't get mad about it. But toward the end of the week, I told him that I couldn't work on Sunday, and he was, I think he was aggravated and surprised. So he wanted to know why. I said, well, I go to church on Sunday, and I don't believe in working on Sunday. And so he paid me off that Saturday night. It was really a good job because I got a little bit of money, and I got to eat there, ate supper there, and they'd fix me what I'd order. I remember getting an order of catfish and sometimes a ham sandwich. My buddy knew about the job and knew I was going to be fired or laid off, Eugene Runnels, and Eugene applied for the job, and they hired him, and I think he spent the whole summer working there. Another good friend, besides Hezzy Lumpkin, was Charles Lumpkin. Charles seemed to be a cut above the rest of us. His daddy was a section foreman for the railroad, responsible for a certain length of the track to keep the track up. And he had a number of black men who worked under him, and they lived in what we call the quarters. I don't remember whether there's 3 or 4 little houses. I suppose they belonged to the railroad, and I suppose the house that Charles and his parents and brothers and sisters lived in belonged to the railroad also. But Mr. Spence Lumpkin had a good vocabulary, and he was a proud man, and taught his boys to be proud, even though some of them didn't have a lot to be proud about. But Charles was smart, and he and I made about the same grades all the way through, and he was a good friend. They had a refrigerator, and it was Frigidaire. The Frigidaire had a big round bonnet on the top. That's where the compressor was. The space in the refrigerator was very limited, and the place that made ice was just just about big enough to hold 3 trays of ice, and that was all. But I was always fascinated by some of the things Charles and his folks had, since they seemed to be better off than we were. I recall Charles asking me to spend the night with him on different occasions, and I really had a reason why I wouldn't spend the night with Charles. Um, I may have had some homemade pajamas, I'm not sure. Sometime in my coming up I did have, but I didn't have underwear. And I knew he did. And so that was the reason. I just didn't want to be embarrassed by not having underwear to sleep in. Of course, they had a bathroom and plenty of places to play. They had a big batch of cane fishing poles in the yard. Every time a train came by, it shook the whole house. I remember that. One of the things that we did in the summer that was very competitive and caused us to have a lot of good times was to cut inner tubes up in strips where it would be round like a rubber band, only a lot bigger and stronger. And then we'd fashion out of wood either a pistol or a gun, and we call those rubber guns or rubber pistols. The rubber guns were fashioned in such a way where they had about 3 notches on them, and you had a string that ran down the barrel, and then you had a lever, and when you pull that lever, that pulled the first rubber band that had been stretched to its limit up and out of the notch, and it would shoot pretty good, pretty hard distance. And we would tie a knot in these, and that would give you more range and also hit a lot harder. So warring with the rubber guns wasn't all that dangerous, unless one of them hit you in the eye. But somehow Ray could make the boys, especially the younger boys, and especially Charles Lumpkin, think that he had always the best of everything. And he would convince them that he had the best rubber gun, shoot the furthest, hit the hardest, and they'd want that. And so he would begin to bargain, and it was amazing how much contraband he got from the boys, trading them a rubber gun that was no different than theirs. One of the funniest experiences I had was we had platforms in the trees. That's where we nailed boards across the limbs. The trees were live oaks, and the limbs were big and went almost to the bottom. They were about to the ground. They were easy to climb, and we were up in the tree and looking out. We could see what was going on all around. They couldn't see us. And there was a little pond down the hill I've alluded to before. Years ago, as I understand, Mother used to do her washing down at that little pond. And he was telling a story about Clarabelle and Katrina meeting up at the pond, and how they got into a fight, and what each one of them said. Of course, he was making it up as it went along, but it was so comic, and I could picture it all in my mind, see every blow that was landed and every word that was said, and I nearly fell out of the tree laughing. There was another time I fell out of the tree. I started on this one time, and I don't think somehow I finished it. I may have been interrupted. But that rope that I got from Hollis, a tremendous rope, nearly big as your arm, I decided I was going to build a swing in the tree right in front of the house. And so I climbed up the tree, and it was hard to tie. It was such a big rope, but I was able to tie one end of the rope to the tree, and then I looped it down so I could tie the other end, and it would be low enough for people to use for a swing. But when I got that tied, it was I'm going to have to go back and change all this. Just exit or mark out everything I said about the rope till here because I'm not telling it right. Uh, the After I got the first end of the rope tied, then I wanted Ray to pull on the rope so that I'd have all the slack that I needed to tie the other rope so it would hang down low enough for us to use a swing. So I told Ray, I said, pull on the rope and tighten it up. Well, I was just hanging on to the limb very precariously, and he pulled the rope. He pulled the rope that I hadn't tied yet, that I was holding in my hand. He pulled that end and snatched me right off of that limb. I never remember hitting the ground. It must have been nearly 20 feet high. It seemed so much higher than that then. And I guess I fainted on the way to the ground because I woke up in the bed and they were making over me because they had got me and I was unconscious, and they put me on the bed, and I was enjoying being the center of attention. And the only bad effect it had, I had headaches for, maybe a week later, but apparently that didn't have any lasting damage. I did have some lasting damage. One time Ray was double hitting me on a bicycle going up Highway 11. He was going to turn in at the school. And he was pedaling as fast as he could make that bicycle go. And the bicycle didn't have any brakes. And so he just wheeled into the driveway to school. And it hit loose cinders that they used to fill up some potholes. And the bicycle went over. I went to one side of the road, landed on my head, and Ray went to the other side. Well, I was the one injured. My head, especially above my eye, was dripping blood, and he took me to the shower and to school. We washed as best we could and got home, and mother doctored me. But until this day, I have a tattoo above my right eye where the cinders never were washed out good. We didn't go to the doctor for every little thing. They didn't take any stitches, and so that was one of the stories I tell about Ray and how I was fortunate to ever live to grow up having a big brother like Ray. But I was always proud of him. He was so much older and so much more intelligent, and he was a good brother to have around. Later, he became my very best friend. They tell a story about Ray's first date with Gene Powell. He went to a school play. I thoroughly enjoyed all those school plays. It was a time to get out and to be at school at night and to visit with your friends and the excitement of the play. On the east side of the big auditorium, there were 4 seats on the sides and then a number of seats in the middle, and there was windows down both sides. So the people would have the windows open without any fans or air conditioning. Ruby Burks dipped snuff, and Ray and Gene were seated by the window, and Ruby Burks was seated on the outside seat, on the aisle side seat. And Ruby Burks made an attempt to spit her snuff out the window, and it didn't quite make the window. Ray wore horn-rimmed glasses, and it went over his horn-rimmed glasses and down his white shirt. And I could imagine how humiliated this young man was on his first date. I remember when Carrier School began to serve hot lunches. Stella Brooks was the lady in charge. At first, the children who couldn't pay the nickel that it cost for the lunch could bring some commodities, some canned goods or other beans or whatever that would help pay their way. But things began to get organized, and they got some commodities from the government, especially orange juice and tomato juice and some other canned goods. Uh, I recall how excited I was each day because you never knew what you were going to have for lunch. Before then, I had gone home to eat lunch because we just lived just about a quarter of a mile from the school. I remember one day I went home and the mother had some beautiful green stuff on the table, and I'd never seen it. It just shook, and it was so beautiful, and I learned it was lime jello, and I'd never seen jello before. And I don't know how she got that jello to gel because all we had was a ice box at that time. Pascal Spears was our ice man, and I think he brought ice every other day, every 3 days, and we put it in the top, and ice would melt, and the water would drip down into a cup at the bottom, and we had a little place to store stuff. But those lunchroom meals were probably, well, they cost a nickel, and that's probably about what they was worth. It's about worth a nickel. In later years, when Miss Alva Harbison was in charge of the lunchroom, we came by to get her plates. I remember in the 6th grade, the plates are already filled, and we went through a line, and we picked up our plate and went to the table. Miss Wyman was our 6th grade teacher, and Miss Wyman was very strong stickler for calling English language, and we call it our English workbook. And she said, "Don't no children, it's your language books. Don't say English, it's language." Well, I recall one day she emphasized it so heavily. We were in line. She was in front of me, and Hezzy Lumpkin was behind me. And he said plenty loud enough for her benefit, "Well, Dale, I see we have language peas today for lunch." We had a nickname for Ms. Wyman. Her nickname was Mossy Top. That meant, she had gray in her hair. One new boy came to school, and he said, "Where do you get your pencil sharpened in this school?" And we said, "Well, Miss Wyman has a pencil sharpener, and but you have to ask permission. She'll let you sharpen your pencil there, but you have to ask her permission." He said, "What's your name?" And we said, "Our name is Mossy Top." So he went and knocked on the door, and he said, "Miss Mossy Top, can I sharpen my pencil?" I don't know what she did. I don't think she appreciated it. Ms. Wyman taught us in the 6th grade. I recall Hezzy kept picking on a girl in the 6th grade. Her name was Claudine Stokes. And bless her heart, she was cross-eyed. And Hezzy would say, "Claudine, are you looking at me, or are you looking at Billy Pennon?" But the thing he liked to do the most was grab her coat from her and put it in his desk, in his seat, and sit on it, so that she would go to tattle on him, and she'd go up to Miss Wyman and say, "Miss Wyman, make Hezzy quit chitting on my coat." Probably the most exciting thing that ever happened in Carrier is when Frank Rogers put together a free zoo. It was on Highway 11, just north of Charlie Mitchell's service station. I watched them as they put up the walls made of slabs that they had got from the sawmill that was free or very inexpensive. They constructed something that looked like a gazebo right out front, and this was the snake pit. They put signs on the highway, both north and south, advertising the free zoo, and on each sign it would say, see the elephant, see the cotamongus, see the monkeys, see the snake pit. And his plan was to trap people who came down the highway. I recall the traffic was always extremely heavy around the first of the year when the Sugar Bowl took place in New Orleans. And so the plan was to trap the out-of-state tourists and fleece them of what money they had in their pocket. It was quite impressive, the animals they had. They must have had at least 40 different animals. They had a black bear, and can you believe it? They had an elephant in Carrier. They kept the elephant in the in the barn at night, across the highway in Joe Spears' barn. He just did fit. The trail through the free zoo was divided. The local people went on the outside, the railing, and those that he took through for a guided tour went on the inside. So the outside just simply led you to look at all the cages and all the wild animals. And then you came out the gate and you were on your way. But those that he was trapping, they would be led on the inside of the trail, and the trail then would wind up in a little room. And in that room they had a roulette wheel. The plan was to bait the people who came down the highway. Up north of the school, there would be one of the people involved in the scam with an out-of-state license plate wired over his Mississippi plate, and they would see an out-of-state car evident by the out-of-state tag, and they would follow the distance, and then they would pass this car. And then they would begin to read the signs and to put on their brakes and slow up. And when they got to the free zoo, they were going very slow, and so they turned in. Well, the person followed them, saw another person turning into the free zoo with an out-of-state tag. They were out-of-state. They felt some kinship. And so the first stop was around the gazebo-looking snake pit. In the snake pit, they had probably half a dozen snakes, different varieties. And the man in the scam would begin a conversation with the strangers, and he would talk about the snakes and ask them about what snakes grew in there, and look at that blue racer, and this one over here, I believe, is a poisonous snake, and they would somehow become friendly. And as they went through the free zoo, looking at the animals, he would lead the way, and eventually winding up in this little room where they had a game of chance. The other people would watch while he involved himself in putting his money down to bet as the wheel turned, and he was winning. He won almost every bet and they stacked up the cash on his, and then he said, "Why don't y'all try it?" And so they uh, risked a few dollars, and they won, and then they risked a little more, and they won, and so they got to winning so frequently, and the stack of money got so big that they finally bet that money and the money they had in their pocket, and they lost all of it. Well, they were so ashamed that they had been taken in, that they had been so stupid, that they didn't turn him in to any authorities. But Carrier was so small that people knew what was going on. Even me uh, as an adolescent or a teenager, I knew what was going on. Now we had at that time my mentor in the ministry, my hero was Clyde Gordon, and Clyde had brought the issue up in a message, and he preached on righteousness, and he made it very plain that we had this happening in our little village, and this cast a shadow over everything good in the village, and also he then passed out ballots for all the people who wanted to get rid of the free zoo, to indicate it on that piece of paper. Uh, I noticed nearly everyone voted for it, and then he saw that he had the whole church behind him, and he asked for the men to go with him after church and to confront Frank Rogers and demand that Frank Rogers leave town with his free zoo. Uh, I was glad to tag along, and I recall that encounter. Frank was there leaning up against the snake pit, and he saw us all coming, and he said, "What can I do for you, preacher?" And Brother Gordon then began to make it firm and make it clear that we would no longer tolerate a free zoo in our community with the attachment of the gambling and the fleecing of strangers who came through. Frank's immediate response was, pretty confidently, he said, "Well, this is a matter of the law, and the law has not indicated I was doing anything wrong. In fact, I'm leasing this land. I've paid a lease to the uh, one who's supposed to uphold the law. I paid a lease to the justice of the peace." Well, it was clear that he didn't intend to leave. So Brother Gordon, short, about 5'5", but a very husky, muscular young man, he walked a step closer and he said, "Frank, I heard what you said, and I listened to your reasoning, and I know you said you didn't intend to leave town, but you see these men around you, uh, we've all together pledged to support of a plan to get rid of this free zoo. Now, every one of these men have a shotgun, and you said you won't move, and you probably were sincere in saying that you won't move, but I'm very sincere in saying that if this place is still open at sundown tomorrow, all of these men are going to reassemble, and all of them are going to have their shotgun, and we're going to blow this free zoo off the side of this hill." And then he turned and walked away. Well, that was a joy to me to see the courage of our pastor, and even a greater joy next morning when I saw him packing up everything in the process of getting out of town before sundown. Well, the sad thing is they found another spot down the road about 10, 12 miles, and they set up their free zoo in that place. It seemed like everyone loved Brother Clyde Gordon, and the children and the young people loved him most of all. When he came to our church, he was a half-time pastor. In fact, he pastored three churches. He pastored West Union and Carriere and McNeil, and he also worked at the same time 60 hours a week in the C&R General Store in Picayune. Now, how he put all that together, I don't know. He told me about having to walk from one church to the other. McNeil was 3 miles north of Carriere. After he preached at Carriere, he started on his walk to McNeil. He didn't own a car. On one rainy day, while he was walking in the rain to his next church appointment, a man stopped to pick him up and he said, "Preacher, what are you doing walking in the rain?" He said, "This is the only way I have to get around." And he says, "Well, I want you to come to my car lot tomorrow and pick you out a car, and you and me and the bank will work out a way to pay for it." And so then he got a 41 Chevrolet. Well, he was mobile then, and he took young people places. The nearest place he took us was to Bowley to swimming, 3 miles, and he played the guitar, and he sang. And so we were so enthralled to have a pastor that cared. About once a month, we'd have a party for the young people, and he would entertain us, and he would be a part of the games. We liked him too because he was in charge of our RAs, and he many times would plan a camping trip. The first camping trip that we planned, we were so excited. We gathered up our stuff for days, and he had a trailer that he picked up. We were going to put all our camping gear in the trailer, the tents, and some of us that couldn't get in the car were going to ride in the trailer. He went by his house to pick up some things before we left to go on our camping trip, and there he got bad news. His sister that lived in Florida was near death. He got a telephone call that his wife relayed to him, and he had no choice. Here we were all set to go camping, and now our leader has to change his plans and go to Florida to see his sister. Well, he didn't call off the camping trip. Before he left, he picked out a place north of the school in a big pine grove that belonged to Charles Lumpkin's family. And he recruited our ag teacher, Mr. Cherry. And Mr. Cherry said, "I will be with the boys when they set up camp, and I'll stay with them till fairly late, make sure they're all right, and then I'll go on home." Well, we tried to put up a tent that belonged to Dr. Horn. The tent was big, and we were not very skilled, and after 3 or 4 attempts, we finally just gave up, and hold on just a minute. We finally just gave up and decided we'd had to sleep under the stars. But most of the boys had somehow secured a pup tent, or they laid claim to one pup tent that someone else had brought that they were going to share. And so they put together about 4 pup tents in a long row. And the leader of that group was David Wyman, Miss Wyman's youngest son. Those in favor that were inside the circle all of them were included in that ganged up bunch in the tents, and they got all their stuff in the tents, and they began to share and visit, and they had candles, and they had food, and they had just lots of time. Everyone had a place in the tent except R.J. Pennon and Dale Holloway. Well, it's always painful to be left out. When they choose up to play softball and they choke the bat one hand after the other when the last hand just has room to grip the end of the bat, uh, they throw the bat over their shoulder, and then they make their choice, first choice, second choice, choose a team. And it always was disheartening to be the last one chosen. It's so painful to be left out. In my life that followed, I remembered the pain of being left out. And so I suppose it caused me to be more generous in expanding the circle to include more people, especially those who were left out. Well, it was a hard night. Just already, we had no tent to stay in. Uh, we couldn't sleep. We sat by the fire, and we kind of consoled each other all night long. We sat up by the fire. I never had been up all night long. The next morning, things picked up a little. Uh, we fixed some food we brought and had our breakfast. And then we went up to the trestles to fish, and I was very familiar with that trestle. I'd caught a lot of little brim or perch in that part of Mill Creek. So I did all right. I probably caught 3 or 4, which is more than the rest. But it was a thrill to be up on that trestle thinking if a train comes by and you don't have time to run off the trestle, you may have to jump. And it seemed like that the trestle was 40 feet high. We then monkeyed around. David Wyman was so ingenious that he'd made his own shampoo. He had it in a pint jar. And so we found a pool of water and was going to take a bath. And we got him to let us use his shampoo. And R.J. and I took that whole bottle of shampoo and poured it in that pool of water. And there was nothing but suds in an empty bottle, empty jar. And David just couldn't get over how we could use a whole pint of shampoo. But it was just a little way to get back at them for excluding us. I remember we didn't get home that day till 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I went right to bed. I'd been up too many hours. And in that time, I guess it was the trauma of the night that we spent left out. But I had nightmares, and I talked in my sleep, and my sister Betty Lou got real upset when she learned what had happened. And I think she gave them a lot of pieces of her mind when she had an opportunity to talk to them. But that was a bad experience. But I suppose the truth I learned was one that probably caused me to be a little more sensitive to people who are left out. Clyde Gordon loaded us RA boys in his 41 Chevrolet. There were 14 of us in the 41 Chevrolet. Oh, why did we put that many? Because that many wanted to go. If you announce RA meeting, a few of them shows up. If you announce a camp out, a few more of them show up. If you announce a trip to Audubon Park in New Orleans, all the boys in that part of the county come. He told us that New Orleans had an ordinance that didn't allow people to have more than 2 persons in each seat of the car. So each time that he saw us approaching a cop, he'd say, "Duck, boys," and everybody except four would get down below the line of vision. Uh, that day we got to Audubon Park, one of the first things we encountered was a man taking pictures. He had a stuffed St. Bernard dog, and this was the biggest dog. Of course, we couldn't imagine a dog being that big. It seemed like it was big as a small horse. And the plan was to get the group to get their picture taken sitting on the stuffed St. Bernard, or so we did. We gathered around, and Billy Deals was the one sitting on the dog. All of us were gathered around. What a day that was at Audubon Park. Of course, we'd never seen animals like this, and they had a monkey island. A great number of monkeys had a house in the middle of the island, and the water all around, alligators in the water and monkeys. And then sometimes alligators would chase the monkeys, and the monkeys did crazy things in the little house on the island. Some of the other caged animals, monkeys, were anxious to get any kind of food that you gave them. We had popcorn, and we were trying to make the monkey with the long tail to reach through the bars with his tail and get a grain of popcorn out of our bag. So I believe it was Pee Wee Ballard that was not allowing the monkey to have any popcorn unless he reached in the bag and with his tail and got a kernel. But this was a smart monkey, and this monkey wrapped his tail around the whole bag of popcorn and yanked it out of Pee Wee Ballard's hand, and he had a feast when he drug it through the bars. There was a baboon that had a baby. The baby looked just almost like a human baby, and the baboon would back off and make a sound. She was teaching that baby baboon to walk, and he'd get up off of his all fours, and he'd begin to take a step and fall, and it was a real delight to watch a mother baboon teach her baby baboon how to walk. Brother Gordon liked to have fun like the boys did, and so he had one of these inhalers in his pocket where you take a sniff and it kind of opens up your sinuses and so on. And so he threw that into the cage, and the monkey, the baboon, had such a big time, didn't know what it was to eat, but then when he'd sniff his eyes would water, and he'd squeal and run off and drop the sniffer and then come back and pick it up. That was comic too. David Wyman was older, and he knew things the rest of us didn't know. So he went to the place where David knew that there was a streetcar that came right through Audubon Park, and he knew that that streetcar went straight down to Canal Street, all the way down St. Charles. And on Canal Street, there was a penny arcade. So some of his friends went, Brother Gordon didn't know about it, I don't think. So they took the streetcar and went to the penny arcade. One of these was my friend Ben Crosby, and he told me about the fascinating things that you could do and see with a penny. One of them had to do with kind of a picture flipping movie of women at work and how they bent over and you could see their legs. And so this was his telling it got us all excited. Things that happened, the things they saw in the penny arcade. I made sure the next time I went to New Orleans, I was going to find that penny arcade so I could see and do those things that Ben told me about. I was just amazed that they had pinball machines that you could play for a penny. You could take $1 and you could have an all-day fun in the penny arcade on Canal Street. I recall some other experiences we had with Brother Gordon. Brother Gordon took us to Napoleon's landing on the Pearl River. The story is that Napoleon had plans to invade the United States, and this was the place that he was going to set up the place of entry into the United States. Of course, that was back when the French had quite an investment in the Louisiana Territory. But then when we got there, there was not much evidence of any civilization. There was a cypress log that must have been 50 feet long and must have been at least 5 feet in diameter. And they say that they had raised it from the bottom of the river, and it was still as solid as it was when the tree cutters cut it. Fishing wasn't too good. Of course, we had planned a long time and dug a lot of worms, and there were some fish to be caught, but boys seldom have enough patience to do much fishing. The excitement was being there on the river and camping out and swimming in the river. Now, I really don't know how Brother Gordon kept from being wildly anxious about the danger that we were in. Was the boys were small, and we were out in the middle of the Pearl River, and we would upend an aluminum boat, and we would then climb up on the boat and dive off of it. And of course, with the current of the river, the boat would float. And first thing you know, you found yourself a long ways from the landing. So we had to paddle back. In order to paddle back, we wanted to get the boat upright. So we were going to pull it to the shore and turn it over and empty the water and then get in it so that we could paddle it better upstream back to the landing. But we looked on the high bank, and there was a man standing with a rifle in his hands, and he said, "This is private property. Get your feet off of this bank. Get that boat away from here, and if you come back, your life is in danger." Well, we didn't hesitate. We left in a hurry. We got back to the camp and made sure we didn't come anywhere around that place. We told Brother Gordon about it, and he said, "Well, boys, there's moonshiners all up and down the river, and probably they had a moonshine still, and he was there to guard it and didn't want anyone to discover it or to tell on them." I recall right after we got our supper together, Brother Gordon did most of the cooking, and I remember how good the French fries were that he cooked in a big iron pot. It came a cloudburst, a terrible torrential rain, so we all had to get our quilts or whatever we had to sleep on and run for his car. And so we got in the car. How we got in, I don't know. It's still a mystery to me, but this time it wasn't 14, it was 15. And all of our stuff. And so they had about 4 layers of boys that went all the way to the ceiling of the car. Of course, the shower didn't last long, thankfully. We were probably all suffocated. And we decided to go up the hill. There was a vacant cabin that had a porch, and we decided that we'd go up and roll out our quilts on the porch. So if the rain returned, we'd be out of the rain. Brother Gordon stayed down by the campfire and decided he'd sleep in his car. The youngest one was Billy Dill. Billy Dill was a pill, and we couldn't stand him. And so we ran him off from where we were. He was causing too much trouble. So he went down the hill whining to Brother Gordon, and Brother Gordon says, "Come on, Roy, come on, Billy, you can sleep in the car with me." Well, the mosquitoes were unbearable and unbelievably large. In fact, Brother Gordon told us a tale about hearing two mosquitoes talking, and one of the mosquitoes said, "Let's divide him. I'll eat half and you eat half." And the other one said, "Well, we ought to go down by the river to eat him." And the other one said, "Oh no, if we go down to the river to eat him, the big ones will get him." Billy Deal then had Brother Gordon's sympathy, and he was in the car, and mosquitoes were so bad that Brother Gordon took his handkerchief and set it on fire and put it in a tomato can so the smoke would fill the car and hopefully would repel the mosquitoes. And it did, and he was able to go to sleep, but he woke pretty shortly, and he felt Billy, or looked at Billy, and Billy was very clearly unconscious. Well, what had happened? He was asphyxiated with that smoke in that closed car. So Brother Gordon pulled him out on the ground, and he said, "It was a terrible horror to me that I brought these boys down to camp out, and I have killed Billy Dill." But somehow he got him revived, but he says, "I never forget the horror of thinking that I killed one of you boys." Another place Clyde Gordon liked to go was to Nicola's camp. Nicola's camp was on the Jordan River, and he knew about a spot where there were lots of, we call them white perch, crappie, the same thing. But you had to paddle a boat about 2 or 3 miles to get up the river across to that bank where he could find that good fishing. I believe there was 4 boys and Brother Gordon in the boat I was in, and we all had the same tackle that he had. We were fishing with minnows, and he was catching giant crappie, and we were hooking them, but we couldn't land any of them. So he caught, while we were trying to catch, not one boy caught one fish, and Brother Gordon caught 13 of the biggest fish I had ever seen. In fact, he measured them when we got back, and the shortest one was 11 inches long, and the biggest one was 13 inches long. And I wondered why he was catching all the fish. And of course, we thought maybe he had a little bit of direct line to the Lord, and the Lord was telling him where to put his hook. And I finally concluded the problem was we wasn't paying attention to our own business. Our cork would be going under, but we'd be slapping somebody on the ear or worrying about somebody else cross-poling us, or telling somebody else, watch your line, and we wasn't paying attention to our own line. another camping trip uh, in the same camp, Nicola's camp. Uh, they, there were two boats, two boat loads of boys, and Brother Gordon had two oars on the boat he was. So they went out in fair weather, but during the night a terrible thunderstorm occurred, and the water got deeper and almost up to where the boys were sleeping. Clyde Gordon got greatly alarmed that they may all drown, and so he had the boys in the darkness, in the torrential rain, put all the gear in the two boats. He then tied the boats together, and then he took the responsibility to paddle the boat using both the oars, paddling that boat, pulling the other boat 2 or 3 miles through the marsh, through the night, through the storm, back to the landing. But that's just the kind of hero he was. I remember he had, on a Sunday night, announced his resignation, and that broke my heart. He had received a call from New Palestine Church south of Picayune, and he had decided to accept that call. I had a few months before experienced a call from God. I was an intermediate in Sunday school and training union, and I never missed a service, and I read my daily Bible reading both in the training union quarterly and the Sunday school quarterly. They were different at that time. And I also read two chapters that I chose. The brothers, older brothers, 5 of them, some were in service, some were out gallivanting. And in that room we had 4 boys who shared one room. But in the early evening, they were gone, and I had the joy of having the room all to myself. And I was praying one night audibly, and I was praying so fervently that I said to myself, you sound like a preacher. And then the Lord spoke to my heart. He said, Dale, I want you to be a minister. I want you to be a preacher. I've called you. Well, the experience was so real that till this day I've never doubted that God spoke to me. But for some reason I was very timid about it. I didn't tell any of my friends. I didn't tell my mama or any of my family. It was such a personal thing, such a sacred thing, and I don't know why I was timid or ashamed to tell anybody. But Clyde Gordon was leaving, and I had wanted for a long time to share this with him. So on a Tuesday night, I got up enough courage to go to the house he lived in, and I told him I had something I wanted to talk to him about. He said, why, Dale, let's come out to my study and let's talk and let's pray together. So I told him about my call, and he said, Dale, I'm not surprised. I've watched you growing up. And the fact that God has called you is no surprise to me. And then he told me all about what I could expect, how much schooling I needed. And I felt so elated that I'd shared this innermost secret with Clyde Gordon. Clyde Gordon had earlier been in the Marines, and he was a very excellent marksman. He had a single-shot rifle, and he'd always be generous in letting us boys take turns. One time the target was a fishing line. The pole had a line on it, went down into the water, and the contest was to see who could shoot and break the line. I don't know how close any of us came, but when Brother Gordon's turn came, he shot the line in two. Another time, buzzards circle. They kind of glide, but they're usually high as the treetops. And just at random, he aimed at a buzzard flying with a .22, and he shot, and the buzzard fell. Pretty good shot, shoot flying buzzard with a .22. One of the most exciting nights of my life was Halloween night, back when we were 14 or 15. We wrote a long list. Larry Spears and I was the one that drafted the list of all the things we were going to do on Halloween night. And we were going to mark them off as we went through these things. We had, I suppose there were about 8 of us. Most of the boys in Care Rear. Charles Lumpkin had broken a leg, and he was not able to go with us. One of the first stops was there's a car that had been wrecked down by the railroad track across the road from Joe Spears' house, and we went to the car and suspicion that the battery was still good, and so we tied down the horn button, so it just kept blasting. The horn just kept blowing and blowing, and then we left it with the horn blowing to irritate all the neighbors. Someone else told us that if you take a potato and ram it on the end of an exhaust pipe, a tailpipe, then when they start the engine, the gases would build up, and then it would blow that potato out with a loud explosion. We didn't know how that came out, but we made sure we plugged up a number of the tailpipes. We had some firecrackers, and tung oil nuts were like black walnuts, only they had a whole section of slices like an orange, and they cracked open at the top, and it had a little groove that you could stick a firecracker in. And these were about the size of a baseball, and so we'd light the firecrackers and throw them on top of houses. This was a lot of fun. One of the other things we planned to do was to swap gates. We had heard older brothers talking about how they swapped gates on Halloween night. So Morris Slayton had a daughter our age named Rose Marie, and that was the target. We were going to get Rose Marie's gate, and we were going to take it off and swap it with somebody else. So we sneaked up to the house, and just as we got hold of the gate, someone inside the house started tapping the window real loudly, and we knew we had been discovered, so we laughed and squealed and ran away. But we'd get a little more courage, and we'd come up with more stealth just as we got hold of the gate, take it off its hinges. We'd hear this tap, 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 tap. Well, before the night was over, we finally prevailed and got the gate off and swapped it with somebody else's gate. We did any other kind of mischief that we could think of. One of the last things we planned to do is to go to the school, break in the school, and ring the bell. The bell was always used to end the period and start the other period back. It had a squeal almost as loud as the sound the clapper made was a rusty squeal before it started to dong as Prof. Powell very slowly pulled the rope to announce the end of the periods and so on. Well, we got in the school all right, and we did whatever mischief we could in the rooms. That time I was in the 7th grade, and we had a good teacher, best I've ever had. Her name was Virgie Simpson, and she was a pretty lady, but she was pretty well endowed. She was a buxom lady, and one of the boys wrote on the board in her room, "You are a milk cow." We wrote a lot of other nasty things on the board, and we then got on top of the desk and we played tag by chasing each other, and the way we moved, we just jumped from one desk to the other. That was a big time we had. But the parting shot was to ring the bell, and it was now about almost midnight. So we pulled on a rope, and I think it was Larry Spears that had the most strength, and we pulled so hard that it broke the rope. Well, there's no more bell ringing, so we made our escape and went on home. Right before we got home, Larry Spears announced to me that, "Dale, in the midst of all that stuff we did at the school, I lost that list of all we were going to do, and it had our names on it. And tomorrow morning, the first thing they're going to do is find that list, and we're going to be in big trouble." Well, he was joking, thank goodness. Right before we parted, he pulled it out of his pocket and he said, "I was just joking." The next morning, another thing we did we thought was interesting. On Highway 11, there was a big 4x8 sign that pointed on the main road that went through Carrier away from the highway, and it said POW camp, and it had an arrow so that people from out of town would know which road to turn to go to the POW camp, where they had German prisoners out at Hillcrest, what used to be Hillcrest Farm. But we took that sign up and we pointed it right straight to the high school, and so it said, pointed to the high school and said POW camp. Well, that morning in chapel, Professor Powell made his announcements, and he said, "I see that our school's been changed. It's no longer a school, it's a POW camp. And so therefore we'll have the same rules and we'll have the same discipline that they have at the POW camp." Of course, he was getting at us for doing that. Roy Neely and some other boys a little older, they were excited when it was buzzing around the school about all the things that took place on Halloween. And he said, you know, Prof Powell is a cagey rascal. He, we went up to ring the bell after midnight, and would you believe it? He had taken the rope loose and took it home with him, and we couldn't ring the bell. We didn't reveal to Roy Neely that we had broken the rope, and that's the reason they couldn't ring the bell. There was a uh, there was a circus that was setting up in Picayune that same afternoon after Halloween, and we wanted to go to the circus. We wanted to get out of school. So about 1 o'clock, two or three of us boys went to Prof Powell and said, Mr. Powell, could we get off early today and go to the circus? And he was always so kind. He seemed especially kind to me. He looked at me in the eye with a twinkle, and he said, yes, Dale, I'm going to let you boys go to the circus, provided that y'all get to bed early tonight. And we knew exactly that he knew exactly who had done that stuff at the school. But the thing that really hurt was Miss Simpson responding to what we'd written on the blackboard. And she said, I saw two messages. One said, you are a milk cow, and the other one said, you are a blockhead. She started lecturing us for about 40 minutes. And she said, I can't help my appearance. That's the way God made me. But she said, I want to inform you, whether you have discovered it or not, I am not a blockhead. I finished college, and I'm your teacher, and I'm not dumb. Well, she went on and on about how those that did that had no respect for me, no respect for the school, no respect for God. And then she said, I'd like to see a show of hands. If there's anyone in this room that was a part of that Halloween prank. Well, I knew I was guilty, and I slowly raised my hand, and then a few other hands went up. And then she told us what